G'day everyone, it's Curtis here and welcome to an On the Back Wheel video. Today I'm reviewing the Mitas Enduro Trail XT Plus Adventure Tyres. So what are the Mitas Enduro Trail XT Plus tyres? Well, I'll tell you this for sure, they are a bloody long-winded and awful name, so I'm going to call them the XT Plus from now on. Look, they are Mitas hard off-road focused tyre. In their words, it says, for the rider that must go anywhere and isn't afraid to tackle even the most difficult and challenging off-road tracks. Look, for everyone else, they're a 20% on-road and 80% off-road focused tyre. So why did I choose the XT Plus tyres? Well, the first reason is they are tubeless. I now have this bike, the CF Moto 450, and it has tubeless rims. And I wanted to, keep going down the tubeless path. Good thing about the XT Plus is they have a massive variety of sizes. I've gone with the 140, 80, 18 on the rear, and the front is a 90, 90, 21. And the rear is the Dakar variety, which means it's harder wearing, gets about 20% more mileage, they say, and it has a harder carcass as well. Another reason is I like aggressive off-road tyres that are hard wearing and are okay on the street. I'm willing to compromise on-road performance for off-road performance. So that's a big reason why I went with these. Let's talk about performance and we'll start with the front tyre. As I mentioned, I've gone with the 90, 90, 21 and it is tubeless. You can also run a tube in it if you want, if you don't have tubeless rims, or if you just like, that extra protection and you're worried about getting a flat. Now, these are actually quite aggressive off-road tyre. They just look like a full-on knobby. They're quite soft to touch, however. And one of the great things I've found so far is they are really good on-road. The on-road feel is very good for a knobby. Yes, it's still a knobby, you're limited by that fact. But they are way better than my previous Motos Dual Ventures. Much better road feeling. They don't feel skatey at all, even in wet conditions. I'm really happy with how they feel on the road. Off-road, I'm impressed. I'm very impressed. The other day I went on an off-road ride and it really was a worst case scenario. It was wet, muddy, rocky, sandy. You had absolutely every going bad for these tyres and they performed faultlessly. I really like the front tyre. It's also bi-directional, so once it wears a bit, you can flip it so you get a more even wear. I'm really happy with this front tyre and I think this might be the one I'll be using on a permanent basis from now on, depending on the wear I get. So far I think I've done about 800 kilometres and it looks new still and hasn't scalloped whatsoever, which is always a positive. I'll tell you what, this front tyre is really good so far. It's just sticking on absolutely everything. The rear, I'm not as hot on. It reminds me a lot of a Motos Rally rear, but much better on the road and not as hard wearing. It's a really interesting tyre in that the carcass on this Dakar is stiff as. It's rock solid, yet the lugs actually still quite soft. So what you're getting is pretty good on-road performance, definitely better than a Motos Rally. Off-road, they're on a similar level. As I mentioned, previous ride I did, wet, rocky, had it all going on. Didn't perform amazing in the wet rocks. I think that's because of the carcass. It's so stiff and it doesn't deform. It's great in that if you got a flat with these or a puncture, you're going to be incredibly unlucky. It's just so stiff. Look, they perform solid off-road. Not amazing. That remind me a lot, as I mentioned, of the Motos Rally. They're kind of good everywhere, but not amazing. I think the lugs could be a bit deeper. I'm a little bit worried about tyre life. People are reporting about 3,000 kilometres. I've done about 800 on them now, and there's some noticeable wear. But even new, I was like, they look fantastic and chunky, but not quite as deep a lugs as I would like. Also, it's worth noting, the rear profile is quite flat. It provides an interesting feeling to begin with. You're like, oh, this is different. It kind of drop off a little bit. You do get used to it though. And look, I'm actually really happy with them. I sound a little bit negative. I am really happy with them. I'm just a little bit worried about that tyre life. If I'm only going to get about 3,000 Ks out of it, which is probably looking that way, to be honest. I might go back to the Mitas Rally just because they perform similarly, but you're getting that better tyre life. I will say on the road, they do feel quite good once you get used to the flat profile. Geez, these tyres feel pretty good on the road. Jeez, these are good. Jeez, I'm fair hustling. In terms of noise, I actually find them to be pretty good. There's a little whine from the front, but nowhere near as bad as the Mitas tyres I previously had, or as bad as a Pirelli Rally once that wears. That was quite bad once it wore in. There's a tiny bit of noise there, but with earbuds in and riding on the highway, that noise is way worse than the whine of the tyre. So they are pretty good. The rear I haven't noticed to be noisy at all. In terms of fitment, I didn't do it, but got the shop to do it. And it's worth mentioning that the rear, he had a lot of trouble balancing. I don't know whether it was him or the rear tyre, but he actually got to a point where he said, mate, I can't get it any better. I'm not happy with how it is. And I was like, mate, that'll do. Like, it's a knobby. You know, you ride down the street and it becomes unbalanced when you wear your lugs. But yeah, definitely worth mentioning if you're doing it at home. Just be wary of that. On my first couple of rides, it was definitely unbalanced, and I noticed taking off and accelerating, it was, you could feel it. And that was something I also noticed until they were worn in a little bit. The rear felt quite, it's a definite knobby on the rear. Now it's worn a bit, not too bad at all. They also are an incredibly heavy tyre. If you're running a CF moto like I am, consider getting the 130 on the rear. I believe it will fit. Just double check with the rim width. There shouldn't be any issues, but I would look at putting a 130 on in future. I was going to do that, but didn't realize they did a 130, and then I looked on the website, I'm like, oh, I've already ordered it, oh well. The reason I say this is because this has only got about 45 horsepower. You know, it's not a powerful bike, and that is an incredibly heavy and big tyre. It's noticeable in that it kind of saps a bit of the power on the bike, and it does change the gearing as well. This is an 80 profile on the back instead of a 70, and I did it deliberately because I wanted to change the gearing just slightly. I felt it was a tiny bit buzzy on the road, and it has changed that, but it has definitely sapped a bit of power off bottom on the bike, so that is something to be wary of. It's an incredibly heavy tyre. Like, having it in the garage and moving around, I was like, geez, this thing is an absolute tank. I think that could also be because it's the Dakar reinforced carcass, much stiffer and harder wearing. Let's talk about how it fares versus the competition. Honestly, I am really happy with the front, and I highly recommend it so far. They kind of hit a sweet spot where it feels good on the road, yet it performs very good off it, yet it looks like it's going to get very good tyre life, and we'll be able to flip it, you know, when we get halfway-ish, so it wears more evenly. I'm very happy with that. The rear, we'll have to see what kind of mileage I get. If I get really good mileage, yes, I'll recommend it. Otherwise, at the moment, if you're on a big bike, probably leaning still towards the Mitas Rally, but that thing's pretty crap on road, to be honest, where this is way better on road than that tyre. They've also got the Pirelli Rally Race. That is more off-road focus, and I love that tyre, but it's definitely not as good on road. This front tyre is definitely more balanced, and the rear, I'd say, is better than the Pirelli Scorpion Rally rear. That one's a little bit more road focused. So they kind of hit a bit of a sweet spot, just depending on the tyre life I get from the rear. As I said, if I get good tyre life from the rear, I will highly recommend it. The front, I am absolutely loving so far. If you're running the tyres, I'm really keen to hear your thoughts on them, especially on what kind of mileage you're getting. If you're not running them, let me know what tyres you're running and your thoughts on them as well in the comments down below. All right, if you haven't, click that subscribe button, check out my other content, keep it on the back wheel. Catches.